The air in the frontier carried a weight of silence that pressed on the soul. Out here, where the mountains cut sharp against the horizon and the pine-scented wind whispered through endless valleys, folks lived on grit and faith. The old American West was a place where a man's word was his bond and a woman's courage was worth more than gold. Yet behind every barn door and weathered cabin, stories stirred tales of longing, temptation, and hearts that could not be tamed no matter how harsh the land became. He rode into town just as the dusk folded itself over the prairie. Dust clung to his boots, and the brim of his hat carried the shadow of a man too long on the trail. His coat smelled of campfire smoke. His hands carried the calluses of work and fight alike. No one knew his name when he first stepped down from his horse, but everyone in that small settlement felt the weight of him. He wasn't there for cattle, nor to gamble in the saloon like most drifters. His eyes told a different story, one written in loss and in a hunger he fought daily to keep buried. She noticed him first from the doorway of the mercantile, her hands folded in front of her shawl. She wasn't the kind of woman who sought trouble, nor the kind who let her gaze linger long on strangers. Life had taught her to be careful. Every choice out here could tilt the balance between survival and ruin. Yet something in the way he leaned against the post outside the store, the way his head bowed as though carrying more than the saddle on his shoulders, made her heart shift in her chest. He was dangerous in a way that wasn't measured in pistols. But in the slow pull of a storm you saw too late. The townsfolk whispered of him over their whiskey glasses, calling him a wanderer, maybe a man running from something or someone. Some said his past was soaked in blood. Others believed he had been a rancher who lost it all. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice was steady, low, carrying the kind of truth that made a listener want to lean closer. She told herself she had no business paying mind. Yet every evening as the lanterns lit one by one, her eyes sought him across the street as though guided by something beyond reason. One night, the fog rolled thick from the river. He found himself at her cabin's porch, the wood steps creaking under his boots. He hadn't meant to go there, yet the pull was too strong. The door opened before he could knock, as though she had been waiting. Her shawl hung loose around her shoulders, her breath caught in the cool air. He looked at her as if searching for a reason to leave, but found none. The lantern inside glowed faint, casting gold across her face, softening the hard truth of a land that showed no mercy. He muttered that he shouldn't linger, that men like him didn't belong near women like her. She only stepped closer, her hand rising almost without thought. Her fingers found his belt, not in boldness but in a trembling defiance, as though to tether him there a moment longer. His chest rose sharply, breath held against the weight of that touch. For a heartbeat, the silence was louder than any gunshot he'd ever heard. "Woman," he rasped, his jaw tight, "you'll drive me straight into sin." The world outside that cabin seemed to vanish. The coyotes howled in the distance. The wind clawed at the shutters. Yet inside, the storm was theirs alone. He wanted to pull away, to walk into the night, and never look back. But her nearness broke the walls he'd built from miles of solitude. She was no stranger to hardship herself, no stranger to loss, and in her touch there was both fear and hope, plea to not let go. But in the West, every choice carried consequence. Somewhere beyond those woods lay the man he had been running from, and the memory of mistakes that bled like open wounds. Somewhere in town, folks were already stirring with suspicion, and rumors traveled faster than horse hooves on dry earth. He knew if he stayed, danger would find them both. Yet as her fingers tightened against his belt, he felt the truth. He wasn't sure he could leave her now. Not when the fire between them had sparked in a land where nothing soft survived for long. The lantern flickered. His breath came rough, hers uneven, as though both stood on the edge of something greater than either could hold back. The night pressed close around them, and though he knew he should step away, his hands found her shoulders, trembling not with fear, but with the weight of everything unsaid. The West had a way of breaking people, yet in that moment, he wondered if it could also be the place where he was remade. And then without warning, the sound of hooves thundered down the dirt path leading to her cabin. He froze, the echo of riders cutting through the still night air. She looked toward the window, her face pale in the glow. He swallowed hard, Every muscle pulled taut, knowing the past had finally caught up. Her hand remained at his belt, holding fast, as though to anchor him to this one fragile moment before it all shattered. The door shuddered under a heavy knock. The silence broke, and the storm outside was no longer theirs alone. The knock at the door rattled the frame hard enough to send dust from the rafters. He didn't move, though every muscle in his body burned to reach for the revolver strapped at his side. She kept her hand fixed on his belt, eyes wide and trembling, as though she feared if she let go, he would vanish into the dark. The knock came again, louder, followed by the scrape of boots against the porch. Whoever was outside wasn't there by chance. He lowered his head close to hers, his voice a whisper rough as gravel. "Stay behind me. Whatever happens, you keep quiet." Her breath hitched, but she nodded, pulling the shawl tighter across her chest. He took one slow step toward the door, his boots creaking on the boards, the cabin's lantern throwing his shadow across the wall like a tall specter. The men outside didn't wait long. A voice called through the wood, sharp and steady. "We know you're in there, Drifter. Best step out before we drag you out." The words hit him like stones. He had been hunted before, knew well the sound of men who wouldn't waste patience. The trail he thought he had shaken had followed him straight into her quiet life, and now she was caught in the storm with him. He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed his back to the door, motioning for her to step toward the corner. She moved reluctantly, her fingers sliding away from his belt like letting go of something she wasn't ready to lose. He listened. He counted the scuff of boots 3, maybe 4. Horses snorted in the yard. Men like this didn't come with reason in their eyes. They came with rifles slung and orders to leave nothing behind. His chest tightened. He remembered the night that had set this chase in motion. A ranch burned under a sky red as dawn, the smoke choking and bitter. Men shouting, guns firing. He had not asked for that fight, but it had swallowed him whole, branding his name with blame he couldn't shake. Whether he was guilty or not no longer mattered out here. The man's reputation rode faster than truth. She watched him, her face pale in the flicker of lamplight. Fear shadowed her eyes, but there was something else too, an unspoken trust. She didn't know his past, yet she hadn't pushed him away when she could have. That trust weighed heavier than iron in his chest. The voice outside growled again. "Last chance, stranger? We'll smoke you out if we have to." The men meant every word. He pictured them dousing the porch with kerosene, setting flame to the cabin. She'd lose everything, not because of her own choices, but because she had opened her door to him. His jaw set firm. He would not let that happen. But stepping out meant facing the very noose he had been running from. He had seen enough lynchings to know that justice in the West was decided by whoever carried the most guns. He had 1, maybe 2 bullets, but against 4 rifles. His odds were paper-thin. He glanced at her, her hands gripping the edge of the table for strength. "Trust me," he said, low enough for only her to hear. She swallowed hard, and though she said nothing, the faintest nod told him she would. He reached for the lantern, turned the wick down until the flame shrank to a faint glow, throwing the cabin into a shroud of shadow. Then he slipped to the back wall, where the logs met uneven, and pressed his fingers along the cracks until he found what he had noticed earlier, a loose board, weathered by years of storms. It wasn't an escape, but it was a chance to vanish, if the moment turned right. The men outside grew restless. Boots pounded on the porch. One struck the door with the butt of a rifle, the wood groaning under the blow. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth to keep from crying out. He stepped close, steadying her with a touch to her arm. Her pulse thudded wild under his hand. He leaned near again. "No matter what you hear, don't open this door unless it's my voice calling." His words were steel, meant to bind her to the promise. She wanted to protest. He saw it in her eyes, but fear held her tongue. Outside, another voice joined the first, deeper, colder. "We got all night, Drifter? You think you can hide in there with her forever?" The words carried weight. Whoever led them wasn't a common hired gun. He was someone with business unfinished, someone who had chased him across rivers and plains to see the matter closed. The match struck, flaring bright in the night. He didn't wait. With a burst of motion, He shoved the loose board from the back wall, light spilling through the gap. The woman gasped, clutching his sleeve. He bent low, meeting her eyes, his tone fierce. "Go first. Run to the trees. Don't stop until I'm behind you." Her lips trembled. "And if you're not?" He forced a ghost of a smile, though his heart thundered. "I will be." The lie sat heavy, but it was the only way to push her forward. She hesitated only a moment longer before squeezing through the gap, her shawl catching on a splinter. He tugged it free, shoving her gently into the night. The shouts rose outside as the fire licked against the porch. Flames clawed up the wall, the crackle sharp. He ducked through the gap after her, his revolver clutched tight. The night air was cold, the smoke sharp in his lungs. She stumbled toward the trees, her figure swallowed by shadow. He followed, crouching low, scanning the yard. One of the men spotted them, a shout breaking the night. There, behind the cabin. Rifles turned, muzzles flashing. He fired once, the shot cracking loud. A figure dropped, clutching his side. The others cursed, bullets tearing through the brush as he dragged her deeper into the woods. Branches whipped at their faces, roots clawing at their boots, but still they pressed on. The sound of pursuit never far behind. The forest swallowed them. Yet the fire's glow followed, casting flickering light against the trunks. She stumbled, nearly falling, but he caught her, pulling her upright with one arm. Her breath came in ragged gasps, fear and desperation driving her forward. Somewhere behind them, the leader's voice rang clear. "Run all you like, Drifter. You can't outrun what you've done." The words echoed through the trees, a promise heavy with menace. He clenched his jaw, dragging her farther from the flames. The night was not theirs yet. The West never gave easy mercy, and this fight was only beginning. But as they pushed deeper into the dark, he felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about his past anymore. This was about her, about the bond that had sparked in the smallest of moments. The men chasing him wanted blood, but if they thought he would hand her over to save himself, they didn't know him at all. The night closed in, every sound magnified, every step heavy with dread. The fire burned behind them, the voices hunted ahead. And somewhere between the two, a choice waited that would carve their fates in stone. The forest seemed alive with sound. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves carrying the weight of danger. Their breaths came in sharp bursts, white clouds in the cool night air. The smoke from the burning cabin still chasing them like a phantom. He kept her hand tight in his own as they wove through the trees, forcing their steps quiet even though every instinct screamed to run. Behind them, the voices of the men cut through the night. Harsh and relentless, their pursuit closing in, she stumbled over a route and nearly fell. But he caught her around the waist, steadying her before pressing her against the trunk of an oak. His eyes scanned the dark woods, sharp and restless, the revolver in his hand heavy but certain. She clutched his coat sleeve, trembling not just from fear, but from the sheer weight of what they had fled. Her voice came soft, barely a whisper. "They'll hunt us until morning." He met her gaze, the tension in his jaw hard enough to crack. "Then we don't give them until morning." His words were harsh, but beneath them was something steadier. Determination born not only from survival, but from a spark of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. The men's footsteps crunched against the undergrowth. Torches flickered between the trees, throwing jagged light against the bark. He pulled her deeper into the shadows, moving low and careful, each step chosen with the patience of a hunter. Still, the enemy's numbers pressed heavy. 3 men at least, maybe more, their rifles gleaming when the torchlight caught the metal. The leader's voice carried above the rest, sharp with command. "He's here. Don't lose him." The woman pressed close, whispering, "Why won't they stop? It can't just be about fire." He clenched his teeth, the truth burning in his chest. "It's about land. Silver in those hills. I know where it runs, and they know I'd never sell my tongue for their greed. They want me gone, so no one else hears the truth." She stared at him, her fear shifting to something fiercer, her grip tightening. She had seen men like that before, power-hungry, cloaked in law, but dripping with violence. Then you can't fall into their hands. Not now. The torchlight grew brighter. He shoved her behind another tree, crouching low, the revolver raised. One of the riders had dismounted, moving carefully with a rifle cradled in his arms. The man's shadow stretched long, the flame licking at his boots. He was close enough now that the scent of sweat and gun oil carried on the breeze. The drifter's finger brushed the trigger, every instinct urging him to end it quick, but the risk was too high. One shot would bring the others crashing down on them like wolves to blood. His heart thundered, his breath sharp, but he held back, waiting. The rifleman paused, listening. His head cocked as though he could hear the woman's frantic heartbeat. For a long moment, no one moved. Then a call broke from deeper in the woods. Found his trail. The rifleman cursed, turning away, torchlight vanishing with him. Relief washed over them both, but it was thin and fleeting. The hunt was far from over. He tugged her hand, pulling her forward again, weaving them through the black pines until the voices dulled to a distant murmur. They stopped only when the slope of the land dropped toward a narrow ravine, water glinting faint in the moonlight. He crouched by the edge, scanning both sides. The ravine was shallow, but the water would swallow their tracks. It might buy them a few hours at most. She knelt beside him, her shawl soaked with dew, her eyes searching his face in the dim light. You can't run forever. They'll just keep coming. He looked at her, and for a moment the hardened lines of his face softened. Maybe I can't, but if I keep moving, maybe you'll have a chance. Her hand gripped his wrist, fierce and unyielding. Don't you dare leave me. You brought this fight here? Now you see it through with me. Her words cut deep, not as accusation, but as vow. In her voice he heard not weakness but defiance, the same strength that had carried her through years of hardship. He had seen men break under less, but here she stood, demanding he not face it alone. Before he could answer, a crack echoed through the trees, a rifle shot, sharp and merciless. Bark exploded above their heads, shards raining down. She gasped, pressing closer to him as he shoved her down the bank into the water. Cold bit at their skin as they waded deep, the current tugging hard against their legs. Another shot rang, splintering the rocks nearby. The night became a blur of motion, water splashing. Voices shouting, gunfire snapping through the dark. He pulled her through the ravine, both half stumbling, half running, until the shots dulled and only the river's roar filled their ears. They collapsed against the far bank. She clung to him, her body shaking, while he pressed his back to the rocks, revolver still clutched tight. His breath came in sharp bursts, his chest aching from the cold and the chase. The torches had faded, but he knew better than to believe they were safe. The men would regroup, circle around, and when dawn came, the forest would offer no cover. She lifted her head, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her eyes glinting with both fear and fire. They won't stop until one of you is dead. His silence was answer enough. The West did not allow half measures. This was a land of final reckonings, where grudges were settled not in courts, but in blood and smoke. He had carried that truth for years, but now, with her hand still gripping his sleeve, it weighed heavier than ever. He forced himself to his feet, offering her a hand. We move again. Higher ground? If we can see them before they see us, maybe we stand a chance. She rose with him, her strength trembling but steady. Together they climbed, the slope steep and punishing, until the trees thinned and the sky stretched wide above them. The moonlight cast the hills in silver, the wind sharp with the promise of dawn. From this height they could see the faint glow of fire still burning where the cabin had stood, a reminder of all they had already lost. He scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowing at the movement below. Figures small but certain, winding their way up the slope. The men had not given up, they were closing in, their torches marking a trail of light that crept ever closer. She stood beside him, her face pale, but her chin lifted. There's no running left, is there? He exhaled, the sound rough. No, they'll force this to end tonight. The words hung between them like a sentence. She turned her gaze toward him, her voice steady despite the fear trembling beneath. Then you fight, and I'll stand with you. For a moment, silence stretched, filled only by the wind sweeping over the ridge. He looked at her, truly looked, saw not just a woman caught in a storm, but someone willing to claim the fight as her own. The weight of that realization nearly dropped him to his knees. The torches crept higher, men's voices carrying faint but clear. The leader called out once more, his tone calm and cruel. "Nowhere left to run, drifter. This hill will be your grave." The woman's hand slipped into his, small but unyielding. Her touch steadied him more than the revolver at his side. He knew the coming moments would carve both their fates in stone. That the West had brought him to the edge of his reckoning. The night was colder now, sharper, the tension stretching tight as a wire ready to snap. Each step of the men climbing the hill beat against his chest like a drum of war. He had been hunted across miles, across years, but never had the end pressed so close. Never had the fight carried so much weight. He pulled her behind a cluster of rocks. Crouching low, his revolver ready, his heart pounding so loud he swore the enemy could hear it. She pressed against him, her breath quick. Her eyes locked on the torches creeping ever closer. The world narrowed to this moment, the cold air, the crunch of boots on stone, the hiss of torches against the wind. Every sense sharpened, every breath measured. The hilltop was no longer just earth beneath their boots. It was the line between life and death, between freedom and chains. He whispered low, steady as stone. "Stay close. When they come, don't flinch." Her grip tightened on his arm. "I won't." The torches neared, the glow brightening, the voices louder. The men were almost upon them, rifles raised, eyes searching the ridge. The leader's shadow stretched long across the rocks, his figure tall and sure. The drifter's finger brushed the trigger, his breath steady, his resolve unshaken. The world seemed to still, the night holding its breath, waiting. Every second stretched like eternity. The tension, a storm, wound tighter and tighter, ready to break. And in that fragile space before the clash, he knew the climax of his long chase had come. The hunters were here, the fight unavoidable, and the hilltop would decide not just his fate, but hers as well. The air trembled with the weight of what was to come, and the West, merciless and unyielding, demanded its price. The hilltop burned with silence, the kind that presses against a man's chest until he can barely draw breath. Torches flickered against the night, stretching shadows across the rocks where he crouched with her at his side. The men closed in, slow, careful, rifles held steady, their boots grinding against the loose stone. Every step they took carried the weight of finality, as if the earth itself knew this fight had been building too long to be avoided any longer. The drifters. Finger tightened on the trigger, every muscle coiled. He knew the odds. One revolver against rifles, one pair of hands against a band of men hungry for blood. Yet the weight of her hand in his steadied him, rooted him in something stronger than survival. He was not just fighting for himself anymore. The leader's voice broke the silence. "Step out, drifter. You've run far enough. You've cost us men, and now you'll pay the debt." The drifter rose slowly from behind the rocks, revolver raised. The woman gasped softly, but he gave her a small glance that carried both warning and promise. He stepped forward into the glow of torchlight, his shadow stretching long behind him. His voice rang out steady, though his chest ached with the storm of fear and rage inside. "I didn't burn that ranch," he said. "I didn't kill those men. You know who did? You've been chasing me not for justice, because I won't keep your secrets." The leader stepped forward, his face carved in stone, his rifle gleaming in the light. His eyes narrowed with cold calculation. "Truth don't matter out here. Only who's left standing?" The drifter's jaw tightened. "Then it ends tonight." The first shot cracked, splitting the night. The drifter rolled to the side, firing back, the echo rattling through the hills. Men shouted, torches dropped, boots thundered against stone. The woman ducked low behind the rocks, her hands pressed against her ears as the storm of gunfire raged. Smoke curled into the air, the sharp smell of powder filling their lungs. One man fell, crying out as he clutched his side. Another scrambled back, cursing, his rifle clattering against the rocks. The drifter moved like a man who had lived his life on the edge of a blade, each shot measured, each step chosen with care. He fought not with fury, but with the hard calm of someone who had carried this burden too long. The leader pressed forward, his rifle raised, his voice a growl. "You can't stop what's coming. This land will bleed silver whether you're alive or not." The drifter's eyes burned with defiance. "Not if I bury you first." The clash stretched long, the night trembling with every shot, every cry, every breath of struggle. At last, silence returned, heavy and suffocating. The smoke cleared, the torches burned low, and the men who had come to hunt lay broken or scattered, their greed silenced by the very land they sought to own. The drifter stood still, chest heaving, revolver empty. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what had been done. The leader lay at his feet, his rifle fallen, his eyes wide with the shock of defeat. The drifter lowered his gun. The fight drained from his body. The woman rose slowly from her place among the rocks, her shawl torn, her face pale, but her gaze steady. She stepped toward him, her hands trembling as they reached for his arm. "It's over," she whispered, her voice carrying more certainty than his heart could grasp. He looked at her, his throat tight. "For now, but out here, fights never stay buried." She shook her head, fierce in her defiance. "Then we bury them deep enough, they can't be dug up again." Together, they walked down the ridge, the moonlight painting the land in silver. The forest lay quiet now. The fire of her cabin burned to ash. The chase ended not by surrender, but by the unyielding will to stand against greed. The drifter felt the weight of years of running lift, though not entirely. The scars of the West did not fade easily. They reached the stream, its waters cold and steady, washing the blood and smoke from their skin. She knelt, cupping the water in her hands, letting it cool her face. He stood above her, eyes on the horizon, where dawn began to glow faint in the east. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to wonder if the road ahead could hold more than shadows. She rose, her shawl damp, her face softer now. "You don't have to keep moving alone. You don't have to keep running." He studied her, his voice low. "Everywhere I go, trouble follows. You saw it yourself." Her lips curved, not in a smile, but in quiet resolve. "Then let me choose. Trouble comes to all of us out here. But I'd rather face it with someone who won't bend than with men who sell their souls." The word struck him deeper than any bullet. He had lived too long believing he carried only danger, only ruin. Yet here she stood, offering not escape, but a chance at something he thought long-lost belonging. The sun broke the horizon, painting the hills gold. The smoke from the burned cabin rose faint in the distance, a reminder of what had been lost, but also what had been endured. The drifter turned his gaze toward the rising light, his voice steady at last. "Then we face it together." They walked down from the ridge, their steps slow but certain. The west stretched before them, wild and untamed, its roads cut with dust and danger, its nights filled with coyotes and silence. But within its harsh embrace lay the promise of something more, the chance to carve out a place where truth might stand against greed, where two weary souls could stitch together a life from the scraps left behind by fire and fight as they moved forward. The drifter felt the weight of his past settle. Not gone, but no longer chained to his every step. The men who had hunted him were gone, their greed silenced, their threats buried. The land would still be harsh, still demand its price. But for the first time he believed he might pay it and still have something worth keeping. She walked beside him, her hand brushing his, her presence a steady anchor. He glanced at her, and though no words passed between them, the silence carried more than speech. It carried promise, resilience, and the quiet bond of two hearts forged not in ease, but in the fire of struggle. The trail wound on, leading them away from the ashes, toward whatever lay ahead. The drifter no longer saw himself as just a man running from ghosts. He was a man walking into something new, guided not by fear, but by the steady strength of the woman who had chosen to stand with him. The West remained what it always was, wild, cruel, unforgiving. But within it, there were still sparks of hope, still moments of tenderness that could survive even against the harshest winds. And as the sun climbed higher, casting its light across the endless plains, the drifter knew that this was not an end, but a beginning. The land would test them. Time would challenge them, but together they would meet it. The old American West was not kind, but it was honest. And in its honesty, they had found something worth holding. And though the road stretched long, they stepped onto it, not as strangers bound by chance, but as two souls who had chosen to face the storm, side by side, no longer running, but finally living. The memories pressed harder. That night of fire, the betrayal, the faces of men he had once called brothers turning against him when silver and land were at stake. He had left with nothing but his horse, his gun, and the guilt of knowing the woman he had once promised to protect had been left behind in the chaos. He hadn't spoken her name in years, but it haunted him still. And now, standing in this cabin with another woman, looking at him with eyes too steady, he felt the weight of both past and present pulling at him. He hadn't meant to bring this danger to her doorstep. Yet the West had a way of making choices for a man, cornering him until the only way forward was through fire. The door rattled again, and he heard the slide of metal or rifle being cocked. He drew his revolver, the familiar weight settling in his palm. She stiffened at the sight, but her gaze never left his face. There was fear, yes, but also a quiet strength. As though she knew this moment would shape not only his fate but hers as well, he thought of the road he had traveled dusty miles with, nothing but the wind for company. Nights spent under a sky littered with stars he could never reach. Days marked by hunger, by silence, by the hollow ache of running. He had promised himself long ago never to care again, never to let another soul close enough to be used against him. Yet here he stood, and the sound of her breath was the only thing that steadied his hand. The knock turned into pounding, the hinges straining. His time was gone. He had to decide whether to step out into the circle of rifles or gamble on slipping them both through the shadows at the back of the cabin. Neither path promised survival. Both carried the risk of ending in blood. He pressed his back to the door once more, listening. The leader outside called again, his tone sharp as a whip. "Come out now, and maybe we'll leave the woman breathing. Stay inside and we'll see how quick this cabin burns." Her eyes flew to his, horror plain across her face. He clenched his jaw, rage and helplessness warring inside him. These men didn't care for truth, only power. He had seen enough of their kind wolves dressed as lawmen, outlaws wearing the mask of justice. The silence stretched, heavy as the air before a storm. His hand tightened on the revolver, the wood grip slick against his palm. He leaned close to her once more, voice rough and low. "No matter what happens, you hold steady. Promise me." The pounding stopped. For a breath, the night outside went still, too still. Then came the scrape of boots on gravel, moving toward the side of the cabin. He knew that sound. They weren't leaving. They were circling, waiting for him to make his move. The lantern's faint glow flickered, casting shadows that stretched long across the wall. Her hand trembled where it clutched the edge of her shawl, but she stood rooted, eyes fixed on him as if drawing courage from his resolve. He drew in one breath, slow and deep, the kind a man takes when he knows the ground beneath him is about to give way. The weight of his past pressed heavy, the promise of her trust heavier still. Outside, the men's voices dropped to low murmurs, plotting their next strike. The cabin seemed to shrink around him, the walls closing in as though holding its breath. The West had never given him peace, only choices carved in gunpowder and loss. Now, with her eyes on him and the knock of fate still echoing in his ears, he knew this night would not end quietly, and when the first rifle cracked the silence, shattering the window in a spray of glass, he raised his gun, his body moving with the speed of a man who had nothing left to lose. The fight had come to them, and the night was only just beginning. Glass rained down across the wooden floorboards, shards catching the faint lantern light as if stars had fallen inside the cabin. She screamed softly, pressing her back against the wall, clutching the shawl tight around her shoulders. He dropped low, the revolver already steady in his hand, his pulse hammering louder than the wind outside. The first bullet had not been meant to kill it, was a warning. A reminder that the men outside held the upper hand. He peered through the broken frame of the window, catching only the blur of shadows moving against the night. 3, maybe 4 figures crouched near the brush, rifles lifted. Their horses shifted restlessly in the yard, the creak of saddle leather sharp in the silence. Whoever led them had the patience of a wolf circling the prey, waiting for a mistake. The woman clutched the edge of the table, her voice trembling but low. "They'll burn us out if you don't go." He shook his head, his tone rough. "If I walk out, they'll do worse. They came for blood. Mine first, yours second." Her face drained of color, but she held his gaze. She wasn't fragile, not like he first thought. There was steel in her, forged by years of surviving in a land that spared no one. She had buried kin, tended land through drought, and faced winters when hunger scraped at the door. She feared, yes, but she was not broken. The leader's voice rose again from the dark. "You got one chance, Driffer. Step out, and we'll settle it man to man. Keep hiding, and we drag her out screaming." The words cut sharp. He wanted to shout back, to meet them with fury, but his throat locked around the anger. He turned instead to the woman, who stared at him with wide, pleading eyes. Her lips trembled as though she wanted to speak, but couldn't force the words past the lump in her throat. He knew this wasn't about her. It was about debts. About old scores carved deep into the bones of the West. Yet the thought of her paying for his sins made his grip on the revolver tighten until his knuckles whitened. The tension cracked again as another shot tore into the wall, splinters flying. She ducked, covering her head, her body shaking. He shifted closer, pulling her against his chest for a brief heartbeat. She gasped at the suddenness of it, but he whispered low, steady, "Stay low. Don't move unless I tell you." He slipped to the back wall once more, pressing his ear against the rough logs. The footsteps outside had split 2 men circling right, 1 left. They wanted to box him in, cut off escape. He thought of the loose board behind the cabin. It wasn't wide enough for both of them to slip out at once, but it might buy time. Yet another thought burned hotter. If he ran, they would take her. If he stayed, they would both bleed. Every path was shadowed. The woman finally found her voice. "Why are they after you?" The question broke sharp, tinged with fear but heavy with demand. He didn't answer at first, his jaw clenched. The truth wasn't a story to be told in a whisper between gunshots. But her eyes, fierce and steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "Left him no choice. They think I set fire to a ranch," he said at last. "Think I killed men who were once brothers to me? I didn't light that blaze, but I was there when it burned. And once smoke rises in this land, truth never matters." Her breath caught, horror flashing across her face, though not entirely at him. She looked away, as though weighing his words against her own sense of justice. He didn't press her to believe him. He had long since stopped asking anyone for that grace. The gunfire ceased, silence rolling in heavy. That was worse than bullets. Silence meant planning. Silence meant they were finding another way in. He crouched near the lantern, blowing the flame out completely. Darkness swallowed them, broken only by the faint glow of moonlight bleeding through the window. "Why stay here?" she whispered, voice breaking. "You could have kept riding. Why bring this trouble to my door?" He swallowed hard, the words catching. "I didn't mean to. I was just passing through. But when I saw you on that porch, I forgot what it felt like to be hunted. For a breath, I thought maybe I could stop running." Her lips parted, but no words came. She pressed her back tighter to the wall, her breath ragged, her fear mixing with something else he couldn't name. Outside. The horses snorted again, hooves striking restless against the dirt. Then came the creak of wagon wheels. His stomach dropped. They weren't bluffing about fire. They had brought oil, maybe kindling. The cabin would not stand long if they set it alight. He cursed under his breath, rising just enough to glance through the shattered glass. The men worked quick, one sloshing liquid along the porch. the other striking matches against the rough wood of his rifle butt. He turned to her, gripping her arm tight. "We can't stay. Not now." She shook her head, panic flooding her eyes. "There's nowhere to go. They'll shoot us down the second we step outside. Better to die fighting than burning," he said, voice low but fierce. The words weren't meant to scare, only to jolt her into the choice they had no time to debate. The subplots of this conflict twisted tighter around them. The leader of those men wasn't simply chasing vengeance. There was land at stake, whispers of silver veins hidden in the hills. Men had been killing one another over less for decades. This wasn't just about an old fire, it was about power, about keeping him from telling truths others wanted buried. And for her, it became a different fight. She had lost family to greed before, watched neighbors driven from their homes by men who claimed law but carried greed in their pockets. To stand with him now was to stand against everything that had ever threatened her peace. But to turn him out was to hand him to the very kind of men who had already taken too much from her life.